I had been on Kaloth 11 months before the mountain proved her right. They called her the Glass Queen behind closed doors, not for any fragility of the body, but because the court said her warnings let you see straight through to the fear underneath. Queen Sorai of House Embrith had taken the throne 3 years before I arrived, 22 years old and alone at the top of a hollowed-out volcano, and from the week of her coronation, she had told anyone who would listen that the lower vein was widening under the palace. The deep-bore pressure logs agreed with her. I should know. I was the one running them. I was a contract engineer, hired by the mining consortium to keep their bore rigs threaded through rock no sane company back home would have touched. My readings matched hers within a hair, week after week, and it earned us both the same reputation. Outsiders reading omens into stone. Regent Calix Thren, who had ruled in her father's name so long he'd forgotten it wasn't his throne, told the court her numbers were instrument drift, and my numbers were a foreigner trying to scare a contract renewal out of them. He was not unkind about it. He simply never once let her finish a sentence in council. I only spoke to her twice in 11 months. Once when she came down to the lower gallery herself, past the warning signs, to read the seismic plates with her own hands, because no one would bring her the data unfiltered. Once when she found me afterward in the access corridor and said, very quietly, that she believed me, and that belief had never once been enough to move a single closed door in that palace. She did not look hysterical. She looked like a woman doing arithmetic that nobody else wanted solved. I sat in on exactly one council session, the week before the mountain woke, because the consortium wanted my numbers read into the record so they could be formally dismissed. I watched her lay the pressure charts flat on the long stone table herself, watched her trace the widening fracture line with one finger, while 6 ministers found other things to look at. She asked for a closure order on the lower vein, just for a season, just until the readings settled. Regent Thren didn't raise his voice. He never had to. He simply said that the Crown's books couldn't afford a season of caution, thanked her for her diligence in the tone you'd use on a child who'd colored carefully inside the lines, and moved the agenda forward. She didn't argue a second time. She folded the charts the way you fold something you intend to keep. And that was the last council session either of us was invited to before the floor started talking back. The morning it happened, I'd convinced myself I was the only one still watching the deep logs at all. The hearth spire woke on an ordinary morning, the kind with daylight pouring gold through the high palace windows, like nothing underneath it had ever moved. The floor told a different story first, a long groan through the bedrock, then a second one closer. Then the lower vein lit up red on every monitor I had. By the time the alarms caught up to the rock, the regent was already on the high terrace, ordering full evacuation of the cinder court, every guard and minister down the cable lifts to the valley floor. Nobody asked where the queen was. I asked. Nobody had an answer worth the time it took to give it, so I went down myself, against 3 separate orders shouted at my back, into the old vent gallery beneath the throne deck, where I knew she'd gone, because it was the one place in that palace her own father had built a manual pressure release 100 years ago and never once needed to use it. The lift cage was already locked for evacuation, so I took the maintenance ladder instead. 40 meters of rusted rungs with the rock getting warmer under my palms the lower I went, the air thickening with a mineral smell I'd only ever smelled before in the bore shafts at full depth. Twice the whole shaft shuddered hard enough that I had to wrap both arms around the ladder and wait it out. Dust sifting down past me in the emergency lighting, like the mountain was clearing its throat. I told myself the entire way down that she would have already gone back up another route, that I was about to find an empty gallery and feel like a fool for it. I did not believe myself for 1 second of that climb. She was there, on her knees in the heat, hauling at a release wheel that hadn't turned in a generation, with a fallen support beam pinned across her own ankle, and the gallery floor already glowing faint orange at the seams. She didn't scream when she saw me. She looked almost embarrassed, the way a person looks when they're caught being exactly as right as they always said they were. "You were supposed to be on the lift," she said. "So were you," I said, and got my shoulder under the beam. It took both of us to shift it, her bracing it with the wheel housing, while I drove it up an inch at a time, the heat coming up through the floor plates hard enough to feel through my boots. When her leg came free, she didn't ask me to carry her. She got up on it herself, jaw set, and put both hands back on the release wheel like the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. "This redirects the lower pressure into the old flow channel," she said, "away from the city terraces. It was built for exactly this. No one ever believed me enough to test it." "I believe you," I said. "Turn the wheel." We turned it together. It fought us the whole way, 100 years of rust and neglect, and somewhere in the second full rotation, the gallery floor stopped glowing, and the deep groan beneath us shifted direction, channeling off through old stone instead of up through the throne deck. The heat didn't vanish. It just stopped climbing toward us, which at that moment felt like the same thing as a miracle. Getting back up the ladder was worse than going down it had been. She wouldn't let me carry her on my back, said it would slow us both, so I went below her on the rungs with one hand braced against her good foot the whole climb, ready to take her weight if the bad ankle gave. It never did. She set her jaw somewhere around the 20th rung and simply refused to stop moving, and I understood then that the court hadn't misjudged her stubbornness, only ever misjudged what it was good for. We came up the service stair into daylight with her arm braced over my shoulder, and half the court already gathered on the terrace, watching the smoke vent harmlessly off the old flow channel, exactly the way her drawings had always said it would. I will remember the silence on that terrace longer than I'll remember the heat. Regent Thren stood at the front of it, and for the first time in 3 years he didn't have a single word ready. She didn't ask for an apology. She didn't need one. She let go of my shoulder, stood on her own leg in front of every minister who had ever called her hysterical, and said only, "The readings were correct," in the same flat voice she'd used in council, 100 times to no effect. This time, the silence that answered her wasn't dismissal. It was the sound of a room finally doing the arithmetic. I expected that to be the end of it for me. Paid out, sent home, a foreign contractor who'd done his job in the wrong direction. Instead, she turned to me in front of all of them, soot on her face, her eyes wet but steady, and said the thing I hadn't let myself hope she'd say. "Everyone on this mountain ran," she said. "You didn't." "I had good instruments," I said, because I didn't know how else to hold that much honesty at once. "You had good instruments for 11 months," she said. "You only had to choose to use your legs today." She didn't embrace me on that terrace, and she didn't need to. She put her hand briefly over mine on the rail, just once, steady as a verdict, and said the words low enough that they belonged to the two of us and not to the court still watching. I won't forget who stayed. I stayed on Kaloth after that, not as a contractor. The regent's authority cracked that morning and never fully set again, and within a season, the queen had her own engineers reading her own instruments without anyone standing between the data and the throne. I was one of them. I still am. People ask me sometimes what it's like, working under a queen the whole court once called hysterical. I tell them the truth. She was never hysterical. She was the only one in that palace willing to be right alone, for 3 years, until the mountain finally agreed with her out loud. I just happened to be standing close enough, with the right numbers in my hands, to go down and get her when it did.